Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Well, welcome, and it's an auspicious moment for me. This is the first of what I hope will be a series of video podcasts. And I am happy that these video podcasts are beginning with an old friend, not old chronologically, although he may think he's that as well, but an old friend who I've known for, I actually started to count close to 45 years. It may actually be 45 and a little bit. We don't necessarily speak frequently, but when we do, it's as if we speak frequently. So,
well put.
So, welcome to Gary David, who is that person whose name will magically appear after the fact. And my name is David Bryan.
David, yes, David Bryan.
And there's no shortage of Davids here.
You have given me the awesome responsibility of being involved in your podcast virginity, losing your virginity.
Exactly. There we are with pollution again.
Yeah.
And the name of the podcast, at least the working title thus far, is Free Speech Allowed, ALOUD, Free Speech Allowed. So I'm hoping that we will speak freely, aloud. So Gary David, I mean, I know you for many years, but it was actually the first time I've ever seen a resume of yours, and I have a little bio thing. And, I'm tempted as to do, because you're such a trickster, I'm tempted as to which to do first. Shall I describe you or shall you describe you? Because you have, I think what people would see as an eclectic combination of interests, past and current past. So, it's not like you were a musician for years playing in clubs and recording, and then you became interested in philosophy, and then you became interested. Many of these things were happening at the same time. So I am curious as to, and I will go through them if you'd like, but I'm curious as to how you would describe yourself.
Well, when you say that, I'm bored with the story I would tell you.
Yeah.
I'm here to learn.
Are you bored with this story? With the story that's on here? You do. Yeah. You are. That's interesting.
Well, it's not that I'm bored with it. It's that I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The word familiar means family. It comes from the word family. You're familiar with it. Okay.
Yeah, you've lived with it for a while.
But I'm more interested in the story you would make up from the little script I gave you.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. So I thank you. So when I first read through this, the numbers, the years, I was looking at the things, and so here's a person who after college was, a brief stint that's not on here, but I'm going to say it anyway, a brief stint in the Army, because I know that, and then a professional musician and playing in clubs, and then beginning the Sound of Feeling, a jazz group that recorded, I don't remember, a couple of albums, I believe, 2 albums, and then studied orchestration with Lyle Murphy, Spuds Murphy, and then worked with Sam Bois on Epistemics. So I would, when I read through it, it was musician, philosopher, epistemics, epistemic counselor. But then I looked more closely, and many of those things were happening at the same time. And so, I think it's either the last question or the first question I really have is other than yourself, right? Sort of, which would be the cheap throwaway answer. other than you, is there a through line in this story? Is there a story about how those things either fit together, or what was the deeper yearning that had concurrent immersion in music and experimental scales and epistemics and yada yada yada? Is there something like that, and writing? And so tell me that story. Tell me if there is a deeper through line.
My mother told me a story.
Yeah.
That expresses what you're talking about. We're talking about meaningfulness, right? What is meaningful? So she said when I was about, I guess, between 2 and 3, or maybe 3, or between 3 and 4, I don't know. We were downtown Sacramento where I grew up, and she was wheeling me in a kiddie car, whatever. And she said, I turned to her and said, Mommy, why are they so worried? Apparently the little Gary was talking about the passersby as we went downtown Sacramento,
Mm.
looking at their faces. He said, why are they so worried? Well, he could have said that about his mother. And I remember walking to school one day and saying, why am I so worried? I haven't done anything. There's no cause for this feeling inside of me. So that was the initial. Hence, the group I formed was called The Sound of Feeling. Music became a way for me
Mm.
to touch that question. And then, what?
The question specifically about why you were worried,
Yeah.
or
What was worry? What did it
mm,
mean to worry? What does it mean to have a feeling and then to think about it?
yeah, that's interesting. That's super interesting,
So
given
it
that I
was
know
like,
where this
if
goes.
meaning was like sound, the music is what you make of sound. If there's a basic meaning biologically for what we feel, worry is a way of making it into a kind of music you don't want to hear.
If somebody were trying to tell a more conventional story, which of course we know is not a good one, but because I think that that's, for me, if there's a through line, it has something to do with um, not being satisfied with convention, right? I mean, yearning for sort of deeper understanding of what. And so do you think all of this called a life, and all of the tributaries it took you on, um, and was it, and is it still, a yearning for understanding of yourself
An
and other
accepting
people? But say what?
an accepting of myself, not
Mm,
understanding. I gave up on understanding myself long ago. But like I've known you a long time.
mm.
Um, you're not a conventional person in my experience. The word convention means convenient. You're not a convenient person
Right.
in my experience. So it takes some work to get to know you. So it takes some work. Convention is a form of boundary that I found confining.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it? The question was what was being confined, and it has to do with the basic feelings that feel at a core level of feeling, the biology of our emotions. There's a need for freedom. Convention is a way of binding that freedom.
So I'm going to ask this question, although knowing you, I suspect I'm not going to get a satisfying answer, but at least at first.
Oh, even if I gave you one, you wouldn't accept it. So go ahead.
That's probably right. No, as you took this journey, and as you are taking this journey, but as you took this journey from that little kid in the cart to to that little kid sitting in front of the bookcase, um, have there been are there more salient stopping points uh, that you feel like really turned the lights on in a significant way? Was it was it music? Was it the years of study with Sam Bois? Was it the work of Sylvan Tompkins? Or I mean, are those were those highlights of the same thing, or was there one in particular that's like, and finally I came across whatever that is, and that really opened my eyes to something? or or is it the ongoing through line and you're still having your eyes open?
It's more like that, but I could give you a theme with variations. All the people you mentioned, Sam Bois, Sylvan Tongan, those are variations on the theme, which is how am I making me here I am on born on into this earth. Maybe I'm from the earth. What does it all mean to me? How am I making meaning of all of this in a way that's significant and has a sense of purpose for me? So
Mhm.
there is a through line. The through line is freedom. Freedom. How do I meet limits to minimize? How do I minimize limits and maximize freedom?
For yourself.
Yeah. So I reached a critical point when I was about my early 20s. I had a quote unquote nervous breakdown. I'll call it a nervous breakup. And it was a breaking up of all the conventions that I had held to be as my stable foundation for making meaning. Okay. I started to question, and I was raised Catholic, so I wrote to my parish priest and asked him about some of the things I was going through, and he never answered me. That silence was a turning point.
Uh,
Mother went to that priest and asked him why he never answered me. He said, I didn't know what to say.
at least he didn't say I never got that letter.
Yeah. And she said to him, she told me, well, why didn't you say that to him? Okay. So that was a turning point where everything that I had depended on suddenly was not there. In that questioning, music was my saving because I could,
Already, even in your early
oh,
20s.
when I was 2, my mother said I sang before I talked.
Mm-hmm.
Music has always been, for me, very meaningful at a core level. As I got into my teens, singing was a way of getting recognized. You know, I wanted you to notice me.
Mm-hmm.
My my father, my mother always listened to my singing. My father, if I sang for him, he'd read the paper while he's listening. And I said, "Did you hear that, Dad?" And he'd say, "Well, you say, yeah, I heard it." And I said, "But you're reading the paper." He said, "I that's the way. That's my way."
Background music.
There was a movie that came out in the 70s called I Never Sang for My Father. I sang for my father, but he
He
never
just
heard.
never listened.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this the search for meaningfulness of significance has led to change after going through many different iterations. So music was there, and I achieved a certain level of recognition. We recorded for 2 major labels. I'm not going to go into that whole story. That's a whole can
Yeah.
of words.
Right.
Okay. But while I was at the height of that, I was also studying with Sam Bois. Now, J. Samuel Bois was a Jesuit priest who got excommunicated. He left the Catholic Church. They didn't like his liberalism. So he studied psychology and in fact became the first president of the Canadian Psychological Association. That's where he lived originally.
Mm.
Then he read a book called Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski.
Korzybski. Yeah. Yeah.
Changed him. It triggered interest. So he contacted Korzybski, started studying Korzybski's work, and he became an epistemologist, which is epistemology is the study of the limits of knowledge, how we know what we know, and what are the methods that we use to know, and what are their limits.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is thought limited or is it unlimited? How are we going to know that? So working with Bois, he gave me a sense that all the difficulties I had been going through have an evolutionary way of thinking about them, not just a psychological one. The disturbances I was going through and so on. So I studied with him for 12 years. During that time, the Sound of Feeling ended around 1970. I got my PhD in epistemics, which is the application of epistemology in daily life.
So can you say that succinctly? The application of epistemology in daily
The
life. What does
study
that
of
mean?
how we form knowledge, and how is knowledge knowing motivated?
Mm.
What at our core, biological core, motivates all knowing? That's the work of Sylvan Tompkins.
I was going to say, was that a feature of Bois' work, or was that? I know
Yes,
that it's Sylvan Tompkins. Yeah.
he gave me the introduction to Tompkins.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Tompkins, well, I don't know for your audience, Sylvan Tompkins was an innovator. He proposed the first theory of the biology of human emotion that he called affect.
Yes, and
The affect.
he well, he bumped into resistances along the way, right? It had not
He
been
still
done
is.
before, and it still is controversial, and etc.
He's
But
dead. He's dead, and he's still meeting what you said. Yeah.
yeah, people are still upset with him.
Yeah. Especially those who are cognitively biased.
Yeah, yeah, got it.
So in the 1940s and 50s, he developed a theory of affect being part of the core of the brain stem,
Mm-hmm.
expressing itself through the skin of the whole organism, yeah, and being reflected in our sensations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Bois gave me the introduction to Tompkins. Tompkins' first major work was called Affect, Imagery, Consciousness. No commas. Affect, imagery, consciousness. A sequence. We won't go into the details about that at this
Rooted
point.
in biology.
Yeah, affect is biology.
Mm-hmm.
Imagery is the representation of what we are biologically experiencing, and consciousness is the result.
Mm-hmm.
So affect is biology, imagery is the beginning of psychology, and consciousness is our whole experience. Where all of that's together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So his book came out in 1962. His first two volumes, it was a 4-volume work. The first two volumes came out by 62.
Is this
Bois,
Tompkins or Bois?
Tompkins.
Mm-hmm.
Bois, the scholar that he was, picked up on Tompkins right away. Very few did. And he put it in his main text called The Art of Awareness. He put the core of Tompkins' insight into affect in a summary. I picked up on that summary, and it took me 30 years to tease out the meaning of that. Because Tompkins' last two volumes came out 30 years later. The first two in the 60s, and the last two by the time he died in 91.
Did you ever meet him and work with
Not
him?
Tompkins,
Not
but I
Tompkins.
met I met one of his colleagues.
Hmm.
His name was Donald Nathanson.
Sure.
He's a psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist in Philadelphia, and he wrote a book called Shame and Pride. I read that book, and suddenly, like filings of a magnet, all of Tompkins' stuff started coming together through Nathanson, he and I became very close friends, and I began to really, it really began to make sense, and I began sharing it with people. That's what I call epistemic counseling. It involves how do these feelings motivate what you think, say, and do?
So I just want to I want to underline that and maybe even come back to that piece that it was noticeable that it's interesting, when you and I spoke the last time, kind of talking about the possibility of doing this. Um, I asked a question about music and being a musician, and you said yes, of course. That I'm always a musician, and on your resume, and I recognize that you're tired of this, and it's perfectly good to be tired
I'm
of
not
one's
really
own
tired
resume.
of it. I'm interested in
Yeah.
your version of it.
Well, so one of the things I noticed was that uh, it's the only place you said currently was when you talked about um, epistemic counseling, right? Currently giving seminars on epistemics and have a private practice in epistemic counseling.
Mhm.
And I guess is that just because when somebody asks you, not that I ever would, what do you do? So what do you do? You need a shorthand. It's kind of,
The
the
elevator.
shorthand. Yeah,
Yeah, the
it's even
elevator.
shorter than if you're going one floor
Yes.
on a really fast elevator. I'm an epistemic counselor. Goodbye. So, so it, yeah. So that's a. I don't want to make more of it than you make of it, but that's a salient and significant piece of of what you're doing right now and of how you spend your time. Yeah, and of where you invest the most energy, meaning, yada yada yada. Is that fair? Is that fair to
That's
say?
fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So can we talk about that for a second? First of all, I mean, are there any others? Are you the only one, or are epistemic counselors a dime a dozen? I mean, not having heard of any others.
As far as I know, I got the first PhD in epistemics
Epistemics for sure.
for
Yes.
sure, and I haven't heard of anyone else.
Hmm.
I had to do. We don't need to go into how all that happened, but um, to me, it's still music. As you and I see us like, you know who Wayne Shorter is, saxophone player,
Saxophone. Yes.
and you know who Herbie Hancock is.
Sure.
They went on tour as a duet, and because they weren't concerned about being conventional or even making musical sense. That was part of them. That's what we're doing. I'm listening to you and I'm responding to you. And when I had the sound of feeling, that's what we did. I would give them a little paper like I gave you on my resume. It's a little scheme. Now let's see what you make of that. That was my challenge to the other musicians.
Hmm.
I didn't compose complete scores. I would bring a theme and say, let's see what we all make of this, which I'm doing with you and which I do 5 days a week with individuals.
Why do you do that? Do you
It's
do that
fun.
with do you do that with everyone?
What do you mean with everyone?
Well, do you do that in all your human interactions?
Do I see in all my interactions a form of making music? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Eh,
It's a form of improvising.
Um,
Oh, wait. It's a form of learning.
it's a form of learning.
Learning is the most important. That is the most important thing that I think we do.
Who does the learning in these improvisations that you involve yourself in?
Whoever's involved, including myself.
And
I'm meeting someone today for the first time. Once says, I want to explore with you.
mhm,
I'm getting more people who say I have fewer people saying I have problems. More people are saying I'm interested.
mhm.
She says she's interested, and I have to learn my way into her world as she has to learn her way into mine, so that
Mhm.
we find where we join value wise and purposefully.
So my questions. I had a whole series of questions about epistemics and epistemic counseling, but um, are there? Could you say something about? Could you say something about sort of fundamental assumptions of this thing that you do?
Hmm.
What are the assumptions of this thing?
This thing.
This thing that you are currently doing,
Okay.
making music in this particular sort of way.
So from the macro view, for the overview, we go from pre-civilization, before language, and ask the question, how did they make meaning? What did they have? What are their resources? They had all of their senses, the sensory input, not only the big five senses, but there might be multiple other sensory receptors and so on. And they had some form of memory. They had no way of symbolizing it in a static form, but they had a way of communicating. The first language was affect, emotion, feeling. It showed up on their faces and in their body language. That was the first method of making meaning. Now, epistemics is the study of the evolution of these methods of making meaning. So, from that, we go to, let's say, 500 BC, where Aristotle codified the rules of logic. And then logic became the primary way of making meaning. And we can go into a whole story about that between the first stage and the second stage. Then, around the 16th century, it took a turn, and it wasn't sufficient to be logically consistent and to state things verbally, but to begin to observe the things that you're talking about, to observe the data, create data. Observation became, and that's when classical science was born. And then at the beginning of the 20th century, we had the insight through physics that in a way we're making up the whole thing. That when we look in the mirror, we see ourselves looking at ourselves. When we look at phenomena, we see ourselves looking at phenomena. And the phenomena is not separate from us because it changes through our instruments. Like this this pen doesn't change if I observe it on the surface, but molecularly and atomically it might be,
Yes,
right?
right, right.
Yeah, it appears
The,
as an object.
yes,
The first people would take the object as all there was.
right.
We don't know. So epistemics in the macro view is about the evolution of our methods of making meaning and what is appropriate at this point in the 21st century.
And okay, that's the macro view. And
The micro.
now somebody walks up to you or calls you on the phone or however they communicate with you and said, I'm interested in exploring with you. So that's their I'm assuming what you're doing with them is 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 closer to them personally than the macro view.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So I would say, well, let's follow your interest. You say you want to explore with me. That implies that there's some kind of interest somewhere. And that interest is very general. And then you're specifying it by saying, I want to explore with you. Okay. So I want to make familiar with that general interest that motivated the specifics. So let's explore your interest. How did you get interested in this? What led you? It's like you're asking me.
yeah. So you just said a moment ago, um, you're getting fewer people who are showing up. I don't know if that's exactly what you said, but fewer people who are showing up um, to you, making contact with you, saying, "I have a problem," and more people who are saying, "I'm interested."
Mhm.
And what are they interested in? Or
Okay.
is the range so broad that that's a silly question?
No, it's not a silly question. You have never, in all the 45 years, I've never heard a silly question come out of your mouth. Or on
That's
the other
because we
hand,
don't
they're all,
speak very often.
well, yeah, and all of them were silly. All
I
that you said is,
had a teacher years ago, who was wonderful. That thing that educators always say, which is, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And he was a chemistry teacher. He still is a chemistry teacher, and actually magnificent teacher. And uh, one day, a student came to me and said, in class today, Jim said, there's no such thing, in response to a student, there's no such thing as a stupid question. But if there were, that would be an example of one. I said, Jim, that is a really funny line. You can't ever say that again. So,
okay,
so
so what are they interested in?
yes.
Okay. What interested you to ask me the question? What were you interested in?
Well, uh, my ultimate question about this, I think, is um, do you see it? You know, counseling is so often thought of as something that a person gets or a small group of people get, um, advice, help with a problem, help with a puzzle, help with an issue, and it's small in its terrain, right? It doesn't extend much beyond that small group, et cetera. And I'm interested in, because probably because that's frequently where my mind goes. Um, do you see it as having um, a larger application that I'm going to get it right? Blizzards are made from lots of little snowflakes, but then there's something that's different, right? The blizzard is somehow more than just a bunch of little snowflakes. Um, so I'm curious about the does this have an application for? It certainly has an application for the individuals who call you or who connect with you, and then maybe there's a group, maybe there's a family, maybe there's a group, maybe there's a community. Does it have a broader application? Do you see it as having a uh, broader value in the world? To a
Application and value to me are very different.
Well, yes, applications can be valuable or otherwise, but
Well, no, not no. When
this
the
is
question,
worthless. That's an
the question,
application that has no value.
the question of value is a very, very important and interesting one to me,
Mhm.
because all value, in my way of thinking, starts biologically. Every feeling of anger or shame or joy or interest is a value.
Totally. Understood. I mean, I
It's a
don't know if that's
nonverbal.
correct, but it's I certainly understand it that way.
If we didn't have those feelings, nothing would be of value. At the higher order, meaning, well, I value freedom, or I value safety, or I value all those things, they would have no meaning if there was not a biological core called an affect system. When affect, when there's a stimulus, it's the affect that gives the stimulus a sense of importance to the organism. It can be a positive sense or a negative sense. Second, negative means punishing. The other one means rewarding. Okay, so it's all value begins with affect. So the question of application is way downstream because it implies a separation between the person and the application.
Why does it imply a separation?
And because it comes from a mechanical model of a division between the observer and the observed. I'm the observer, and I'm going to apply what I'm observing to this situation. If I'm building a bridge, yes, application is the question of application is important. How do I apply it? When it comes to myself, there's no two people.
Right. So I guess I'm asking a question. Maybe I'm not clear. I guess I think what I'm asking is, so your experience tells you that you, and I'm assuming tells the people you work with that what you're doing um, is useful to them, is successful, is rewarding. It's something they come back for. They value, you value, maybe for different reasons, but it's a,
Rewarding, yes.
right. Okay, so
Rewarding.
I guess I'm asking, might the work of the study of the exploration of this thing, epistemic counseling, have, do you see it as having, um, as speaking, as potentially speaking to an audience that is more than, other than, different from an individual? And I guess,
Yes.
so you do. So tell me what you mean,
Well,
because maybe
I
you're not
also
answering the question I'm asking.
go
But I
say a
like
little more.
yours better. Well, I'm
Say a little
thinking,
more.
I guess I'm thinking about, you know, I know, well, the Gary David I knew previously paid less attention to to things political, or to things that would make it into the news, or that the sort of the movement of large groups in a culture, and much more attention, much more refined attention to individuals, to individual human beings that you associate with, come into contact with, help out, learn, whatever it is, hang out with. Um, and I think, my sense at the moment, and we're living at a time that I don't know if it's a time like no other, but it's certainly a time when groups are fraught, right? I think because people are paying attention to things as if they come from groups. Um, but there's a burning need, I think there's a burning need for people to be able to um, work together, sort of in something that doesn't keep them in their group, but perhaps creates another group, perhaps. Right. I mean, like, if you think about it in politics, it's like they talk about crossing the aisle, right? And I recognize it's a simplistic way to think about it, but this like currently what's going on in the whole vaccination world, right? I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and and um, and these people think anybody who doesn't get a vaccination is just, is at least foolish and at most criminal. And in the opposite direction, same thing. And anybody who does take it seriously and puts a mask on and all of those things are sort of, you know, just listening to the efforts by the I can't think of the terminology, but the deep state to control their lives, et cetera, et cetera. And they can't speak to each other, right? I mean, the groups certainly can't speak to each other, and frequently the individuals can't speak to each other. They can yell at each other.
What's in
So
the way?
what's in the way?
What's in the way of them speaking to each other?
Well, I mean, I think it's the stories they have of what the world is like, right? I mean, what is going on, right? One group sees one thing, one group sees another thing, and there it is. But
My question is rhetorical, but go
no, I
on.
know that. Yes, I know, but I'm asking, other than at the level of the individual, does epistemic counseling have an application? You'll excuse the expression, have a role to play? Might there be a role to play in bridging those gaps at the level of groups, or is bridging the gap at the level of groups always about bridging the gaps between individuals?
Well,
There are
look,
groups out there that are right. There's a group called Braver Angels at the moment. I think they used to call Better Angels, be called Better Angels. They changed their name. I think Better connotes a halo, and they wanted to be braver. Um, uh, and it's I think a relative powerful, but relatively simple approach to getting people to speak to each other, right, at the level of individuals. So is epistemic, is there a role for epistemics to play, epistemic counseling to play in that terrain, or is it always about discovering, making music with those individuals?
what is an individual?
Is this an obscure question? Is it
No.
obtuse?
What do we mean when we use the word individual?
Well, encapsulated in some
It has
skin
no
bag
meaning
with a bunch of stories.
until you put the word individual into a context. It has no meaning in and of itself. It's like a variable in algebra. A plus B equals C. You don't know what the value of A, B, or C is until you assign one. So I'm going to assign a value to the word individual, meaning that the individual means at core someone who's undivided, individual, indivisible, and the environment is part of them. So the group and the individual cannot be separated. As we work with individuals, we are also working with the multitudes.
So yes,
Now,
understood.
yes,
Everybody ripples out, right? Everybody
everybody
ripples out.
ripples out. That's how change happens. It doesn't happen through application.
Well,
There's no way I would
not
ask the
sure we agree
question.
on this. So say
That's
more.
good. Okay. If there's an application, it would be a negative one, meaning asking if the two of you can't talk, what's in the way? My role is then to show the motivation for the inability to talk. And in my view, it's a simple word: shame, fear of shame,
Say more.
or
Say more, because
using.
that's not in. It's certainly not to me. I suspect for a lot of people that would not be intuitive.
That's true.
Right.
I
So
have a very unintuitive view of shame, but we can't go into it in the short period of time that we have. But the fear of shame leads us to attacking.
Say that more slowly. The
In
fear
order to
of
protect,
shame.
the fear of shame means it will lead me to attack you or hide from you, in order to preserve my face, my sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And I will use shame, try to shame you out of your views. That's a no-win situation, see? Because you're using the poison that you're feeling to try to remedy what's going on between you and the other person. You're merely heaping poison upon poison. Now, you can't talk people out of that. It depends on what their purpose is.
Whoa, slow down. What do you mean you can't talk people out of that?
You can't tell people be kind.
Oh,
You can, but
yeah. Be kind or I'll hit you.
all right, let's go back to the macro view. The main purpose of the initial stage was safety, and the main affect involved with that was fear. As we evolved, that wasn't good enough. We now wanted to clarify, because safety and feelings, projections led to confusion and instability. So we're going to create logical systems to give us clarity. So clarity became the primary purpose of the second level. Then we developed the purpose for power. We want power over nature. We want to be able to carry out our purposes with nature. And we were very successful. We led to atomic energy and stuff like that, right? Newton. But the fourth one is say, well, if we've been making all this up and we've hit a limit in our imagination, now it behooves us to start looking at ourselves and how we're making meaning. And what is our new purpose? It can't be only safety. That's necessary. It can't be just clarity. That's necessary too. Look at the court system. And it can't be just power, because power is limited. So now the main issue becomes creativity. How creative can we be? And what's in the way of approaching limits that we hit? That has great application. With every individual I work with, how do we approach a limit? They say, well, we don't have limits. I say, to say that you don't have limits is a limit. Yeah, there are always limits on planet Earth. If you felt good all the time, you'd be entitled to say, I have no limits. If you had all positive affect, you'd be in the Garden of Eden. But then shame came along in the Garden of Eden and all the negative affects. And suddenly we have limits. So the fourth stage is, how do we approach limits? So two people who have different ideologies have reached a limit. And I've developed a little mental model of the 5 ways of approaching a limit. Are you interested in that?
Totally.
You think
Yeah.
you're
I think actually most people would be interested in that.
okay?
I mean, if they understood the question, right? How do we approach limits? Because we all have them, or at least we all behave as if we have them. And I actually don't think that positive affect sort of changes that, right? I mean, sometimes you want to
If
do
you had
things.
no negative, David, if you had no negative affects, imagine what life would be like.
Okay. And
There's no limit, no limit. So when we say limit, limit to what? To getting what we want.
limit, yeah, I guess limit is, I don't want to, I don't want to dive into, I don't want to just be semantic, but limits are, limits can generate things, right? I mean, it's that
They're necessary.
well, they even teach you, right? I mean, it's like, that story about the snake, like making its way into the into the stalk of bamboo. It doesn't like the feeling of being restricted, but one of the things it learns is how it moves, right? Because ew, this doesn't feel good, whatever that is. So limits are potentially generative, but let's not go there.
I'm not giving any value to the
To limit,
notion of a limit. The notion of a limit means that it's a distinction.
right,
Every time you make a distinction, you've created a limit
right,
between one thing and another.
okay.
That's
So
basic.
yeah,
So when we reach a limit, and the limit is either to getting what we want or what we need, those are different, but we won't go into that. When there's something in the way of getting what we want or what we need, we have learned 5 ways of meeting that event. The first way is little babies. When you don't get what you want, you go helpless. That's the first method, helplessness.
I'm listening.
Okay. Second method, you become a teenager. When you reach a limit, what do you do?
Well, it depends on which kind of a teenager you are. You either push through it, you go around it,
You try to
or
go
you
around,
comply.
or you comply. Passive aggressive,
Yeah,
right? Let's say your parents divorced, and you're living with your father, and he gives you, he creates a limit in your life, and you don't like it.
I'm
Say,
going to
I'm going to go live
mom's.
with my mother.
Yeah,
What? Yeah.
yeah,
And
I'm
then
going
she
to
does the
mom's.
same thing, and you go back to your father. So you rebel against the limit in one way or another, passively or aggressively. The third way is to become an intellectual, try to problem solve, figure it out. Well, that really works well when it comes to, planning the evacuation from Afghanistan.
Sometimes it works well, sometimes
But
less so.
you soon hit the limit of that method
Yeah,
when it comes to human beings, especially oneself. I cannot figure out my own problems as if there's one person who had the problem and another person trying to figure them out. That's an illusion. So you soon hit the limit of the intellect. And then when those three fail, you get exhausted. Oh my God, none of it works. I just give up. That's old age. So child, teen, adult, old age. Now, let's take the artist. How does an artist in their work meet a limit? Igor Stravinsky said, I love limits. He says, my creativity depending on meeting a limit, how I'm going to approach it. I may not transcend it, just learn, as you said about the serpent, just learning my way, how creativity moves is liberating in itself. Whether I break the limit or not, that's not my business. My business is to keep approaching, keep learning. That is fundamental learning, like a child learning to walk. They don't give up. So the fifth way of meeting a limit, it
sorry.
almost takes you back to babyhood, when you don't give up. You make mistakes, you face the shame, use the shame as a stepping stone to the next level of learning.
I'm curious. I'm curious about why shame appears at many places in this story. Um, so when an artist approaches meets a limit and is seeking a response that feels better, maybe it's a solution, maybe it's just whatever, an accomplishment of some sort. Do they necessarily feel shame? Why the assumption that shame's there?
Okay. So I'm going to give you are you okay?
Yeah, I just
You have some, take
I'm
your
trying
time.
not to cough into the.
No, go ahead and cough.
Yeah,
Let's let it happen.
there we go. I won't edit it out. If you cough, I'll edit it out. But if I cough, it's charming.
You feel okay today?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. How about
Or
you?
shame. Shame, 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 shame. What is shame? One night, I was in Ojai, California,
A place I have been to numerous times.
numerous times, and I stayed at Krishnamurti's old house.
Hmm.
It's a kind of like bed and breakfast place that you can go rent a room. You did too. Okay, which room did you stay in?
Oh, I don't think I know. It was in the. It was the upper. There was an upstairs and a
They all have
downstairs.
names. They all have names.
Oh, they probably do, but
I stayed in the David Bohm room.
Oh, cool.
So as I slept,
I have a feeling. I have a feeling that that it's like George Washington slept here. I think
yeah.
Krishnamurti lived in a lot of different places. Some of them he may actually have been to. So
Well, for me, it
I
wasn't
was
so
in
much
one of
George.
them.
It was more like Scrooge. I was like Scrooge being visited by the ghosts of Christmas past and Christmas future and all of that.
Right.
Anyway, so it, in Ojai, since there's no big city, the night skies are very clear. And it was in I think it was in it was a very clear night, and I went outside and I looked up. There was a partial eclipse of the moon. I said, "Oh, that's shame. Oh, that's what he meant." Tompkins and Nathanson. A partial eclipse of the moon. Oh man, think about that for the moment. You're enjoying the light of the moon, and then an eclipse comes along. Let's say you could watch it in real time, but it doesn't fully eclipse the moon so that you lose the light altogether. It's a part you can still see the light, but this dark shadow is coming across it. That shadow is shame. The light are your positive feelings, interest to excitement and enjoyment to joy, and something happens, and this dark shadow comes on and says, "Hey, these positive feelings are being limited by this event. Pay attention."
So shame does not mean um, what it frequently means in common parlance, as in
Right. It
you're
it
ashamed,
means
you should be
both.
ashamed of yourself.
Yeah, it means both. It's both the biological event and the psychological meaning you make of it. I am describing the biological event.
Understood.
It's a partial impediment to your positive feelings. If I wanted to kiss you and you turn away from me, it could trigger shame. If I had the sense that, well, maybe he'll come around, that the light of the positive feelings are still there, I won't. That's one thing. But if I say, well, he was rejecting me forever, if I lose the light completely, it's a full eclipse, I'm going to go to more toxic feelings. So shame is overrated as a toxic feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's mistaken for other feelings that are much more toxic, like rage, fear, and disgust, for example. And I have found that in the creative process, being able to stay in the light of this event, of the eclipse of your positive feelings, especially interest, leads you to extend your presence further. If you go to protecting me, the self-image, you lose that opportunity.
Can I ask you a question about the the more general? I'm following what you're saying, but I'm also struck by um, is there an assumption in the work you're doing that by using language um, in a way that it is not necessarily commonly used, that there is a value, the value of just getting somebody to stop, right? I mean, that is not, it's not COVID. That that's not uh, that's not how people frequently use the word shame, right? It has
Not at all.
right, and so so you're using it that way, and you do use it that way, and I'm assuming it comes from, at least in part, from the work of Tompkins, et cetera. Is there a value? Have you do you find there is a value in using language in a way that that a person has to stretch for
Yes.
to disturb whatever the normal sequence of things is in how they
Yes.
think? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Mm.
I do find value. It was for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
I
was
get it.
for me.
Hmm.
Because it disrupted my ordinary way of my conventional way of thinking about shame,
Right.
and that shame is all about me.
Mm.
But there is a larger sense of self in the use of the term organism, for example. The organism is more includes me. I'm the person, let's say, within the organism, but the organism is much more than I can encompass in my self-image.
Right.
The organism is phenomenal as well as
Yes.
having yeah, it is
Yes.
phenomenal. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right.
So you use the term salt. What's the chemical thing for salt?
Sodium sodium chloride.
Yeah. So sodium chloride is the biological use of the term shame, and there are different kinds of salt, right?
Sure.
So we use the word shame, meaning sodium chloride, and then we have different kinds of salts, different
Yes.
kinds of shame, such as disappointment, uh, uh, guilt, shame of myself. There's different forms that this chemical will take, but we call it all shame because we wanted to see, for you to see that in your personal experience, there's a biological event. That insight, even intellectually, makes a difference.
Hmm. I could understand that. I'm also curious whether uh, the instances of shame, one of all of the salts, um, do all the salts have a negative valence? Guilt.
Yes.
Uh, why?
Let's say that every time you cut yourself, instead of feeling pain, you had an orgasm.
Pollution. Okay.
Imagine, imagine what would happen.
Yeah.
You'd die.
Yeah. You'd bleed to death,
The
especially as a
negative,
teenager. No one would get past their teen years.
the negative affects are meant to hurt, so that to get your attention.
But why does blocking out a piece of the moon, and I get that it's metaphorical, but why does blocking out a piece of the moon, why is it necessarily negative?
Well, instead of it being the moon, say you're sunning yourself, and a
Yeah.
cloud comes over the sun, and you have the sense that that cloud's never going away. That'd be different from saying, "Well, I'll get the sun back. I want the sun. I wanted to see the full moon. It's because of what I want that it appears as an impediment, and
Mhm.
any impediment to those positive feelings will feel punishing to get your attention to ask the question, what is it that's getting in the way? Rather than, oh, there must be something wrong with me or you.
So let me ask you this, and this I don't know if this is more a personal question than intellectual, but so you've done what you do with people for years, and for some people for many years, right? Working with particular individuals, some shorter
And
time,
with groups, and with
and
groups.
with groups. And have you ever had the experience of people or person um, getting value from valuing what you're doing and valuing what you are doing with them, um, but they never learn the language?
Many people never learn the language.
That's interesting. And yet there's
And I get paid for reminding them.
Oh,
That the
but
use
you'd get paid anyway, right? Whether you reminded them or not.
well, I have to earn it.
Yeah.
Okay. Reminding them. No, they begin to see that language matters. That language is a powerful influence into what we experience.
It both matters, but it also is, there's lots of different languages in the world, and that story about a rose by any other name. So
Well, each language has a system.
yes.
Now, let's take music. Let's take the 12-tone system.
Yeah.
Let's take the piano. It's black and white keys, right? And they're all
Right.
evenly spaced. All evenly spaced. They're called half steps.
Yeah.
The
Well,
the white key of C goes to the black key of C sharp or D flat, and then the next one is D, C, D, E, and so on. Okay. Now, you're not obligated to use that system, but if you use it, you're limited to its structure.
right. Right.
It's the same way with verbal language. We have an Aristotelian based subject object language. You're not obligated to use it, but if you do, there are pitfalls and assumptions based on ancient history
And
that are
is that
built into it.
and is that true of the language that you're using in your work with people?
Yes,
It's a
it's
structure, and
limited.
it's limited.
Those stages of the change in the way we make meaning also applies to our current stage. Part of our current awareness is to ask three basic questions. What's in any scene? What's my purpose? What am I trying to do? What am I leaving out? And what am I assuming? So, I anything I'm saying to you, I'm checking it in two or three different places, mostly in my legs, my chest, to see if I'm in tune. Is what I'm saying in tune with the whole organism? It will let me know if I am or not. Right?
Are you?
I'm feeling really like we're improvising and we're moving. I feel no impediment at the moment. Okay. Now, someone says to me, when I talk to you, I don't have the feeling that that I can say anything wrong. I said, because I'm very aware of how limited I am. I'm not going to assume that you're unlimited or limited. I said, I give you the best of what I have to offer, and I will question it if it's not adequate. We'll get feedback, biofeedback. Remember
No,
Dr. Barbara Brown at UCLA?
not sure I do.
Well, you were at UCLA, weren't you, with
I was.
Valerie Hunt?
Yeah.
Yeah. Barbara Brown was the one who had the main study on biofeedback.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I was a subject for those experiments. And I learned to be an expert at recognizing alpha waves and running a train. So the train was my feedback. I was in alpha.
Yeah.
I became an expert, and they put me on National Geographic TV special on biofeedback, running a train with my
With your alpha
brain,
waves.
with my alpha waves, right? So a bass player that I had worked with for many years, and I hadn't seen him for many years, calls me up. He says, "Gary," I said, "Charlie, haven't talked to you in a long time." He says, "Yeah, all those years I worked with you and I never knew." I said, "You never knew what, Charlie?" He says, "That you have supreme consciousness."
I thought he was going to say that you're a train conductor, in addition to a musical conductor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So biofeedback is when I'm with someone, I'm
Yeah.
getting through their face
Yeah.
and their body language.
It's interesting, this is apropos of nothing, but as you know, my wife is a psychologist and works with people clinically, and although she is working with people remotely during this time, she says frequently, I couldn't do it. It's certainly, it's certainly not as full an experience as when she's in the room with somebody. And I couldn't
Right.
do it if I don't know them, right? If I didn't already have a relationship with them that was established by being proximate, being in the room. And so much of what she does, so much of where she goes, so much of what she says, how she speaks with, interacts with the people, have to do with her being aware of her instrument,
Her participation. Yeah.
yes, of her sensation, of her. It is crucial in, at least according to her story, in what she does. So it's very interesting. So from
But
the outside,
her
okay.
goal is therapy.
No, I mean, for some people, I think that's probably true, right? Some people show up in very similar way to what you described. Some people show up because they want to, because something about how they're feeling is not satisfying, and they're, but some people show up wanting to explore. And those are her favorites. I don't mean her favorite people, but her favorite work.
So wanting to explore is a high order abstraction. What motivates them to want to explore?
Yeah.
They've hit a limit of some kind.
I don't know enough, but yeah.
Well, let's just say if they've reached the limit of some kind and they want to extend their presence further.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and they either they've had an experience with someone in the past where that was where it was rich territory, then doing that sort of, kneading dough with another human being is, in the process of making the croissant, right? That's something that they've found valuable. And so here they are again, right? They haven't done that in a long time, perhaps. So something gets them into the room. And yes.
At what point does a croissant become a croissant?
Apparently 14 folds with butter layered on each one.
But let's say that the minute you have the intention and the ingredients and you start to mold them together, that is a croissant in my book.
Yeah. Well, that's why McDonald's makes a lot of money, because you can get a crescent roll at McDonald's, and I guarantee it's not folded 14 times.
Oh no.
And buttered each time.
That's conventional thought.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, ready-made croissant, which is only croissant in name only.
Yeah, in shape.
Yeah.
This kind of looks vaguely
resembled. It's a representation. Okay. So I know that we're going to run out of time,
Yeah,
but there are
you do have to. You have to leave. You have to sign off at 3:30.
well, I've
A
got
little.
lots of time here.
Okay.
It's not even 2:30 yet here.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, but
I want to. I
you
have
have to
another
wrap
hour.
up by. Yeah.
I have another hour.
Oh. Okay. Well, good.
You can edit out whatever.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Um, a number of things concern me. The number one issue is how healthy am I learning? We're always learning, but we can learn in unhealthy ways in which the way we think has become polluted with mistakes of the past ages. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is the relationship that we make between silence and symbol. How silence becomes symbol, how the croissant gets folded 14 times and becomes symbolic, right? And the third thing is the difference between symbol and sign. A stop sign doesn't become a symbol until someone obeys it. These are all the traffic of thought and how the meanings of our lives become polluted that I like to explore with people because I've explored those things myself. I'm still doing that.
Are you doing that when you're doing it with people?
Of course. I mean, it's it's part of me now. I can't do anything otherwise.
Well, I mean, yes, and I think it's also, I think it's safe to say that there are therapists, counselors, something, right? People who offer advice to other people, who um, who do it in a way that McDonald's does it, right? I mean, it's formulaic.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So
The majority.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't offer advice. I see myself more like a steward. You know, I'm on this boat here and you
What
want
are
to
you
go.
stewarding?
I'm the person, they want to take a trip. They want to take a trip and I will steward them to wherever they want to go. And I'll find, well, if you go down that path, my experience is
Right.
you're going
There's a
to meet,
crocodile down there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you're prepared to deal with crocodiles, I wouldn't
Yeah.
go down.
Exactly.
So I'm not offering that as advice. I'm just letting you know. See, if one of the main concerns with people that I deal with is the question of self. What does that mean?
Wait,
What are
say
the
that
limits?
again. One of the main concerns of
That
people
people
that you
who
deal
come,
with.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are the limit? What is my what? Who am I? What am I? What is the self, and what are its limits? That's one of the main questions we explore.
Do they know that's the question they come with walking in the room, or do you bring them to that understanding?
They have an ambiguous sense of it. Every one of them does. They wouldn't be taking a boat ride with me unless somewhere along the line they want to question something about themselves. Not just about how they feel, but who am I?
Right.
What am I?
What am I supposed to do next? What should I do?
What shall
What
I
about
do? Right,
exactly?
right.
You could be an astrologer, but
So we have developed this internet. The epistemic internet has developed over the centuries that streams into our brains. That's how I'm seeing it.
mm,
So that if they're not my thoughts, I have to evaluate what streams into my consciousness. The methods of evaluation become very important. If I don't do that, it takes over the biology of my emotions and runs amok. I had a fear dream the other night, fear of abandonment dream. When I woke up, the sense of fear was so pervasive in my chest, in my stomach, and the thoughts pouring in almost triggered panic. I couldn't, I had no way. I have given up trying to stop the feeling. I've also given up on trying to stop
The thoughts.
the thoughts, the streaming,
Right.
right? I had to accept the whole thing together. The streaming of the thought, the movement of the feeling, accept it. It's like,
What does accepted mean in that sentence?
I'm going to
To
tell
accept.
you,
Thank you.
it means getting interested.
Mm.
Where does this come from? See? And I could feel it as little Gary. This is how, when I was a kid, how I used to respond to certain events that resembled that dream.
Mm.
And it's a recognition. Oh, I see. That didn't make it go away immediately. It's like if I'm walking and I bump my shin on a table, it's going to take a while for that pain to subside. Nothing I can do about it. I rub my leg and all that, right? So it took about 2 hours without engaging with it, and it went away. So acceptance means to get interested rather than fear. Rather than fear of fear, it's interest in the fear. A positive affect meeting a negative affect triggers change. And then you got to give the body time to respond to that change.
When you say what do you mean the body?
The sensations that you feel.
Mm. Yeah. Well, this is not about me. It's more about you. But
No. It is about you.
Oh, so you said you had a wait. You had a question. Well, how did I come to do this?
Yeah.
What's your why am I doing this?
Yeah. What's your purpose? Why means what your purpose is. What are you trying to carry out? There's some value you have that you want to carry out, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, okay, multidimensional response. Some of which I don't, some of which I absolutely don't know, but I might find out.
With you, it's probably a non-dimensional
That's
response.
probably right. I as we can tell, magical things happen in this world. So although we've certainly been sitting here ever since we started this recording, evidenced by our clothing, suddenly I'm clean shaven and my hair short. So not sure how you did that, but this epistemic stuff really works. What, if anything, do you want people to know about epistemic what the things that you think about, the things that you do? What do you want people to know about that? Well, yeah. I mean, in some ways, what would you want? What would you want your legacy to be?
Well, I've seen the. Oh God, that's such a can of worms.
Good.
You really want me to go into that?
Sure.
Epistemics is like it's a methodology that it has no content of its own. It provides you with suggestions that will make the way you make meaning less incoherent. Like you teach children, that's a dog, that's a cat, that's a tree. So being able to name things is a great power, has great power. But how we so coherent thinking is when what you say, this is a goat and this is a sheep, and you don't mix them up. They don't belong together as goats and sheep. That's coherent. It works. But the problem is that in our virtual reality, where there are no physical goats and sheep the world of our imagination, we put things together that don't belong together all the time. And we take things apart that are whole. Those kinds of dynamics is what epistemics addresses.
And I think the implication is that coherent, you said coherent, right? Not coordinate.
Yeah, coherent.
Coherent thinking, coherent seeing, coherent gaze
Yes.
is beneficial.
Well, I don't know if it is or not, except that this is where we have come to on the growing edge of our knowing processes. But the thing is, whatever problems there are in the world have been created through thought. Animals don't have the kind of problems we have.
Right. They have different problems and the same problems, but different
They
problems.
don't
Yes.
think as abstractly as we do.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And it's that abstract world that has built into it incoherence, in the sense that it's putting things together and taking things apart all the time without thinking about thinking as a problem. For example, our environmental issues I see as semantic issues. Semantic means physical and psychological together. They make one whole. We talk about it separately. There's thinking and feeling, but they're never separate in the whole human being. So when we think about the people think about themselves as on the earth, for example, which means that I can take myself off the earth, or I'm separate from the earth. So if I throw something out of my car window, it doesn't matter. I'm not participating. It's just the earth. It's just a platform. It's how you think that is creating most of the issues in our lives. Now, you asked me a question last time about the application of, you got to understand that epistemics is not a philosophy, it's a methodology. It deals methods, how we do what we do, how we know what we know, how we make meaning, not what the meaning we make.
So if two people were to use this methodology, would it take them to different places? Or would they, in other words, if one is thinking coherently, will both, would two people thinking coherently come to the same conclusions about whether or not to throw that piece of paper out the window? Or
They would come to similar conclusions, but not the same.
so it at least suggests that there's I don't know if I would call it a philosophy, but an orientation, an understanding, and an orientation that is.
But the problem is it's not epistemics. Epistemics is just the stewarding toward something.
Right.
It's that person's engagement, how they participate in it, that is primary.
Yes, but you just said that they would come to some similar.
They would come to they would have similar thought patterns that do not separate what is inseparable, meaning the human being with the earth.
Right. So is there at least in your mind, is there not in your mind, but in your mind about the world, is there a deeper truth that this coherent way of thinking brings a person to?
I wish I knew.
Yeah. Do you care about that?
About truth?
Well, when you say "I wish I knew," is that like really you're looking for something, or
No,
it's just an interesting question?
At this there's a whole thing about the stages of development of how thought has developed. In the current stage of thought, the search for truth has become an exercise in putting a mirror to a mirror. So, in the looking for truth in the past was, let's look in the mirror and find out the real picture. Now we realize that we have to also look at the mirror, the medium in which the images are coming forth. So I think that the notion of truth in a limited way is useful, like tell the truth in court and that kind of thing, tell the truth in politics, that kind of thing. But you don't want to delve too deeply into that because it's a castle made of sand. I mean, if you delve too deeply, it's truth, facts, data, all of that. What does that all mean? You don't want to go too deeply into it. So at this stage, I'm limited by the fact that we are, to a great degree, of making the whole thing up. There's a projective further stage where it may be different.
Some sort of access to some, for lack of a better term, unmediated apprehension of.
No, a lessening and a diminishing of the importance of knowledge.
Right.
That was my dissertation was called Participating.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So at that stage, I project and I surmise, I don't know, I project that knowledge is the source of our problems, which knowing is a process. Every human being is knowing.
Yes.
How that knowing accumulates is called knowledge. And we've had what is it? I just read this. To teach pride in knowledge is to put up an effective barrier against any advance upon what is already known, since it makes one ashamed to look beyond the bounds imposed by one's own ignorance. George Spencer Brown.
Yeah.
So that's where I am. I would see myself at stage 4, at this stage of development, as realizing the humility of how knowledge is limited, but we don't know to what degree and how much and where. So that's what I've been exploring.
Mm-hmm.
But now I want to get back to before you had your router problems and your question about legacy and your inquiry into epistemics. So here we are talking, and I asked you,
what's the purpose?
What was your goal or purpose in doing these dialogues?
Yeah.
And you said, I didn't want to have to bite my tongue. I wanted an environment where I didn't have to bite my tongue. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Pause. That's true. I'm not sure that's actually possible.
What's actually possible?
Speaking without biting one's tongue.
Oh.
But or at least me doing that. But I think it is. And there's certainly, it's kind of like clean hands, there's no such thing as completely clean hands, but you can get cleaner and cleaner, right? So I think that's probably true about biting one's tongue. There may not be an end state, the perfect end state, but one can certainly self-censor less.
There's a phrase in the legal system: you have to go to court with clean hands, right?
Yeah.
The court is not going to support you if you don't have clean hands. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Good
All
luck
right.
for that.
In the arena that we're talking about biting your tongue, I have never, okay, 86 years, I've never seen such hard biting of tongues in my lifetime
As what?
as I have seen all my previously. This is a time of people biting their tongues and bleeding.
Mm, yeah. I think that's both true and not. I mean, there are some people who don't seem to have that trouble, and other people who uh, who do it a lot. I just wish, you wish they would speak more truthfully, right? More truthfully, meaning reflective of what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
That's an interesting thing is in human history, human evolution, when the inside became different from the outside.
mhm,
And it happened, especially when tribes were conquered one by the other, when the people started to gather more together. And then they'd have to live with their conquerors and have to hide what's inside of them so that they could
yes,
survive. Yeah.
right.
So have you been doing that? Have you been hiding from those who conquered you?
Um, I think I think no, but I think the hiding was facilitating a conquering that they weren't actually trying to do. Right. So
Well,
like by
elaborate on that. Elaborate on.
well that by deciding that now's not the time to speak about this, or now's not the place, or this is not the person with whom I could speak about this. Um, that person, I mean, you never know where those utterances might have led,
Mhm.
and that the reluctance to do that may have been entirely in my mind, or may have been in my mind because of something that I was confronted with, but but not speaking, not being truthful, not being honest. Um,
For a purpose.
I'll I'll never know. I'll never know what reaction or what that might have caused for that other person. That somebody else might have said, "Hey, I think you're right." And so I was imagining this is a situation where it would be best to not speak fully or truthfully or honestly, or to hold something back or whatever, because of something. And in fact, it may have created opportunities for connection and understanding and ideas that never happened. And it may not. It may have been wise choices. I don't know, but
You,
I will say it's exhausting.
well, look,
Living that way is exhausting.
as I hear you, I'm hearing the word limit. That we're finding the word limit and the word boundary are the same.
Yeah,
Same.
yeah,
So there are physical limits, right? I can't flap my arms and fly.
right.
Uh, and it's after 86 years, there's some things about walking I can't do as well. I went on a hike yesterday, and I'm very careful at places where I just would jump before.
Sure,
So there are such things as limits.
absolutely.
Some are physical, some are imagined.
Yeah,
Yeah. The point is to be able to test the limits in a way that minimizes the hurt.
yes.
So I see you doing that now.
You see,
You doing that now. You're creating a context in which you can see if the limits that you had imagined
yeah,
will
that's the
hurt.
hope.
Well, how will they hurt, and how much will they hurt if you cross them?
That's right. That's right. And that's the hope. And if nothing else, comes of all this but that, I'll be happy. But I also think I'm doing this with a purpose. I'm not sure this is a purpose, but it's a motivation. Because it feels like there are some things there's some things that feel important to know, and there are some things that are interesting to know, and there are some things that feel like they're both. And I'd like to explore all that with people who are passionate about something, interested in something, pursuing something, engaged in something, because I like that.
Well,
And so
I have another hope in that regard for you.
good. I'm glad it's for me.
That not only the things you said, but find out what it is you know that you don't need to know anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lighten the load so that when you leave a mark, you don't have to write a whole tome.
Yeah, I've written a couple of those. I'm done writing those, I think.
I know.
I
You write a
might,
tome.
I might have surprised myself, but there might be another one cooking.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly.
You hope that in all those words that you use to write a book, that there will be a few things there that are of use to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so in the exploration, what you're talking about biting your tongue, and we're talking about limits and crossing boundaries. Now, you ridiculed me for using the
I'm not, almost anything that comes after that partial sentence is probably incorrect, but go ahead.
for emphasizing shame.
Oh, I don't think I ridiculed you.
But
I'm definitely not convinced, but yes. But
right.
I'm curious about it.
All right. So in my exploration of how we make meaning, I found that if we had no emotions, it wouldn't matter. There would be no boundaries except the physical ones. Think about that.
We had no emotions. Yeah, I suspect that's probably true.
Okay. So what is
But life might be a lot shorter.
What?
Life might be a lot shorter because if somebody else had them and you didn't.
Well, that's the case now. With the earth.
Yeah.
We have them. It doesn't.
No, it doesn't at all.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the one with no emotion is at a disadvantage and is more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then it's a double-edged sword. With emotions, we're also vulnerable in another way. Like sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Well, common sense says that's true, but that's not the way it works out.
Turns out that's not true at all.
Right. So every time you cross a boundary, David, in my way of thinking, there's a potential for shame.
Sure.
Because whatever you were engaged in that was of interest or enjoyment to you, and you cross a boundary, you have to bite your tongue. Well, this might not be the time and the place. It's going to diminish those positive feelings to follow your interest. And that biologically, in my model, triggers shame.
Wait, say again. It necessarily, crossing a boundary necessarily triggers shame.
No.
No.
Listen, you have to be very careful about how I'm saying this, because there are two in biology. I'm only speaking biologically now.
Yeah.
And that's artificial to do that. Okay, so just accept this artificial saying what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
You have two positive affects. I'm going to give the word affect to the biology, not emotion. Affect. There are two positive affects. Enjoyment on a continuum to joy, and and interest all the way to excitement. Those are the two. They're spectrum. Okay. Those two feelings, if you only had those two feelings, well, first of all, you wouldn't survive. But if you only had that's our picture of the Garden of Eden. It's just joy and interest and so on. But in the story of the Bible, a boundary was set, the tree of knowledge. If you eat that, something bad's going to happen, right?
A lot of stuff happens.
So they ate it. And what was the feeling? What was the first emotion? Shame.
Yeah.
God came in. Oh boy, we did wrong.
Well, God didn't even have to get there, right? Didn't they clothe themselves before God showed
There
up
you
again?
go. Exactly. So it's coming from within. So shame is the trigger, the biological trigger that says your positive feelings are being diminished. The air is being sucked out of your positive feelings, but not entirely. There's still, quote, hope. You can still see the feelings are there, but something's in the way. It's as though you're sunning yourself, cloud comes over the sun. You can still have the sense that it's going to pass.
It's kind of there.
That's shame biologically. It goes so totally against common sense.
It's an interesting use of the word. Yes, shame.
We had to use it because shame affect, when it becomes shame emotion, we want people to see the relationship between the biology and the psychology. Shame is not the most toxic feeling that has been made to be. It's the ignoring of shame to save face that leads you to more toxic feelings. That's the premise I go by. So when you cross a boundary, that doesn't mean it's going to trigger shame. There's a potential for shame if you lose the sense that you can get the positive feelings back.
Yes. Right.
Like if I'm watching my TV and the power goes out, I don't feel shame because I know I can't get it back. It's going to come when it comes, if it comes. That's not shame, see? It would be like a partial eclipse of the moon rather than a full eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
So shame and boundaries are a whole conversation.
Perhaps we'll have another.
Mm-hmm.
Well, good. This may be a good place to stop.
Okay.
Stop that conversation.
You the boss.
and then we'll have another.
Yeah, and you don't have to bite your tongue. But this forum, this podcast that you're doing, you have a real opportunity to open that up in a way I haven't seen before. Because of what the openness that you exhibit, it's as though someone says something that ordinarily they think they're going to get a bite back on. They won't get it from you. You'll say, "Oh, okay, tell me more about that."
Yeah.
Yeah, that right. I think that's good. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Well, good. Well, so thank you for being willing to be a first guinea pig.
Anytime.